Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am your host, and today we are packing our bags for a little island getaway.
Yes, grab your bags. I am really thrilled to unpack this one with you today.
But I need you to do me a favor. Put away the sunscreen, forget about the giant fish balls, and, ignore the bicycle rentals for just a second. We are heading to Cheung Chau.
Cheung Chau, the famous dumbbell.
Exactly. And I think for most people, myself included, Cheung Chau is, well, it's the holiday spot, right? It's where you go to sweat, eat mango mochi, maybe watch people climb a tower of buns.
Right.
It feels like this sleepy, charming fishing village that just exists solely for tourists to have a nice Sunday.
It definitely has that vibe now. But the stack of sources I brought today paints a completely different picture. If you look past that tourist surface, Cheung Chau isn't just a holiday destination. Historically, it is a geopolitical heavyweight.
A heavyweight. I mean, it's tiny. You can walk across it in 20 minutes.
True, but think about that dumbbell shape you just mentioned. Geologically, it is a tombolo.
A tombol.
Yeah, two granite islands connected by a sandbar. That formation creates a natural double harbor, protected from the wind on both sides. And because of that geography, this tiny spot has been punching above its weight class for centuries.
So it's not just a place to buy dried seafood.
Far from it. Our mission today is to look at the bones and skin of this place. We are going to uncover a history of massive pirate fleets, a bizarre legal system where a single family owned the entire island.
The entire island?
The whole thing, plus racial segregation lines carved into the granite, and how a deadly plague actually created the festival everyone loves today.
Wow. We have dossiers on land tenure, colonial ordinances from 1919, research on the 1894 plague, and records of post-war aid from the Kadoorie family. So let's jump in. And I want to start with the thing everyone thinks they know about Cheung Chau history.
Yeah.
The pirates.
You really cannot talk about Cheung Chau without talking about Cheung Po Tsai.
Right, the pirate king.
Yeah.
Every tourist map has Cheung Po Tsai cave marked on it. I have actually been there. And honestly, it's underwhelming.
It's basically a hole in the ground.
It is. It's tiny, it's dark, it's damp. You have to squeeze through this crack in the rocks with your phone flashlight. The legend is that this was his treasure vault. But looking at the historical reality you have laid out here, that doesn't seem to add up. Why would a king hide his loot in a wet burrow?
He wouldn't.
Yeah.
And that is the first myth we need to bust. The cave is a great tourist trap, but it makes no sense if you understand the actual scale of Cheung Po Tsai's operation. People tend to imagine a Jack Sparrow situation. One ship, a drunk crew, maybe a parrot.
That is exactly what I imagine.
The reality was much more terrifying. At his peak in the early 19th century, Cheung Po Tsai commanded the Red Flag Fleet. We're talking about roughly 50,000 men and 1,800 ships.
Well, hang on. 1,800 ships?
Yes. For context, that was larger than most national navies at the time. The Spanish Armada was huge, and that was only about 130 ships.
Wow.
So Cheung Po Tsai wasn't just a thief, he was an admiral. He established what was essentially a state on water.
A state on water. So they had laws.
They had an incredibly strict code of conduct. This wasn't a chaotic free-for-all. For example, they funded the fleet through protection money, something called the command flag. If a coastal village paid the fee, they got a flag to hoist on their boats.
Like a don't shoot me subscription service.
Exactly. But here is the kicker. If a pirate from the Red Flag Fleet harassed a village that had paid for a command flag, that pirate was executed, usually beheaded.
Beheaded. For stealing from the wrong village.
Immediate death penalty.
Yeah.
Cheung Po Tsai knew that his empire relied on order, not just chaos. If people stopped trusting the protection, the revenue stream would dry up. It was a brutal but highly efficient tax system.
That changes how I picture him completely. He's less of a swashbuckler and more of a CEO of a very violent corporation.
A CEO with a massive navy. And this is where the geography comes back in. The real historical hidden gem of that area isn't the cave. It is the view from the hill above the cave. The hill. If you stand there looking west, you aren't just looking at a nice sunset. You are seeing the strategic advantage. The Red Flag Fleet used that shallow water and the islands to ambush government fleets. They could lure the Portuguese or the King Navy into the shallows where their big, heavy ships would get stuck.
And then the swarm attacks.
Exactly. It was a fortress.
So how did it end? You have a pirate army of 50,000 men. I assume the Chinese emperor didn't just let that slide. Did they eventually send in a massive fleet and blow them out of the water?
They tried. In 1810, there was a massive stalemate battle against a coalition of the Portuguese and King navies. But the fleets were evenly matched. The government realized they couldn't actually defeat him militarily without destroying their own navy in the process.
So what happened?
Politics happened. The resolution of the 1810 Great Reconciliation wasn't a defeat. It was a negotiation. Cheung Po Tsai surrendered. But the terms were incredible. He wasn't executed. He wasn't sent to prison. He was made a colonel in the King Navy.
Wait. The pirate king became a high-ranking police chief.
Essentially, yes. He was allowed to keep about 30 ships for his private use, and he was tasked with hunting down the other pirate fleets, his former rivals and colleagues who refused to surrender.
That is the ultimate if you can't beat them, hire them scenario.
It is a perfect example of how power works in this region's history. The transition from illegal violence to state bureaucracy was often just a signature on a piece of paper. One day you are the terror of the South China Sea. The next day you are enforcing the emperor's law.
That is a wild pivot. So the pirates leave, or rather, put on uniforms, and the island settles down. But this idea of who is really in charge brings us to the next layer of our deep dive, the land itself.
This is probably the most unique legal anomaly about Cheung Chau, and it's something almost no tourist knows about. It explains why the island feels so dense and different from other parts of Hong Kong.
You mentioned that phrase bones and skin earlier. I assumed it was poetic, but it's actually a legal term in the dossiers, isn't it?
It is. In traditional Chinese land law, there is a concept of splitting ownership. You have the subsoil rights, the bones, and the topsoil rights, the skin.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So usually, if I buy a house, I own the house and the dirt it sits on.
Right. But imagine a scenario where one person owns the hardware, the actual land, the bedrock, and everyone else is just leasing the software, the right to build a house or farm on top of it.
Okay, I'm with you. So who owned the hardware? Who owned the bones of Cheung Chau?
A single clan. The Wong Wai Tsak Tong.
One family.
One clan. Back in the Qing dynasty, around the 1700s, they acquired the cultivation license for the entire island. They are the landlords of the whole rock.
So everyone else living there, the fishermen, the shopkeepers.
They were all tenants.
But usually when the British took over the new territories in 1898, they changed the land laws, right? They wanted to modernize everything.
Usually, yes. But the British colonial administration was often pragmatic to a fault. They looked at this arrangement and effectively said, well, the clan is already collecting rent and keeping order. Let's not break it. In 1905, the colonial government issued the block crown lease. It officially recognized the Wong clan as the landlord of about 90% of the island.
90%. So for the vast majority of the 20th century, while skyscrapers were going up in Central and the subway was being built, people in Cheung Chau weren't paying property tax to the government.
No. They were paying rent to the clan. The clan then paid a tax to the government. It was a kingdom within a kingdom.
That is mind-blowing. It sounds like feudalism survived right through the modern era. Did this cause problems?
Massive problems. Think about the friction. You want to renovate your house. You need the clan's permission. You want to transfer the deed. You need the clan involved. And by the 1960s and 70s, the clan members had scattered. Some were overseas, some were hard to find. It completely froze development. You couldn't just buy land because nobody could sell you the bones.
It's like the island was locked in a time capsule because of the paperwork. When did this finally end?
You would think the 1950s or maybe the 70s, but no. It legally ended in 1995.
1995. I was listening to Oasis and using dial-up internet in 1995.
It is incredibly recent. The Hong Kong government had to pass specific legislation to end it. It cost the government 20 million Hong Kong dollars in compensation to the clan to finally buy back the bones of the island.
That is incredible. It really shows how colonial law didn't always modernize things. Sometimes it just froze them in amber. It calcified these customs.
Exactly. It created a legal fossil. But here's where the story gets darker. While the British were preserving this Chinese custom on one hand, they were introducing a very different kind of land control on the other.
Right, the invisible line. We're moving to 1919 now.
Yes. Now, we know about the peak on Hong Kong Island. It was the elite zone, reserved for the wealthy and the Europeans. Chinese people were famously restricted from living there for a long time.
The VIP section of the colony.
Well, Cheung Chau had one too. The other peak, the southern part of the island, the hilltop area.
And this wasn't just a social custom. It was written down.
It was codified in law. The Cheung Chau Residence Ordinance of 1919. It explicitly reserved that southern area for missionaries and non-Chinese residents.
What was the justification? Did they just say they didn't want neighbors?
The official line was to protect missionaries from rising rents. They claimed that wealthy Chinese merchants were moving in, driving up prices, and the poor, humble missionaries couldn't afford to live there anymore. so they needed a protected zone.
That sounds suspicious.
It was a classic colonial excuse. We need to segregate to protect the vulnerable. But the actual result was racial segregation. It effectively created a whites-only enclave on the island. And for the listener who likes to explore hidden gems, this history has left a physical mark that you can still see today.
The boundary stones.
Yes. They planted 15 granite stones to mark the border of this zone. They are engraved with numbers. You can still find them if you know where to look.
And there is one specifically you wanted to highlight. Stone number 14.
Stone 14 is fascinating because of where it ended up. Over time, the village expanded, and buildings were constructed around these stones. Stone 14 is now located inside the premises of St. John Hospital.
That is highly ironic.
It is deeply ironic. A stone that was carved to mark a boundary of exclusion and segregation is now sitting in a place dedicated to healing and universal care. It's a powerful symbol of how the island has changed, but also a reminder that these invisible walls were very real.
It really makes you think about how geography can be weaponized. We look at a hill and see a nice view, but someone else looks at it and sees a way to separate us from them.
Exactly. First, the pirates used the geography for war. Then the clan used the bones for profit. Then the colonials used the hill for segregation. It is all about controlling the space.
Okay, speaking of controlling space and defending it, we have to talk about the event that gave Cheung Chau its most famous tradition, the Bun Festival.
The Jiao Festival.
Right. Most people go for the lucky buns and the parade with the kids floating in the air. It's colorful, it's loud. But the origin story is actually terrifying. We are back in 1894.
The plague year. This was the third pandemic of the bubonic plague. It hit Hong Kong incredibly hard.
And we have to remember, this is before modern antibiotics. People were dropping dead in the streets. What was the government's response?
Panic and destruction. The colonial authorities were operating on miasma theory. The idea that bad air and dirt caused disease. They didn't fully understand the rat-flea connection yet, so their solution was aggressive. Burn the furniture, destroy the houses, and impose forced segregation of the sick.
That must have been terrifying for the locals.
It was. Imagine soldiers coming into your village, taking your sick relatives away to plague hospitals where they likely wouldn't survive, and burning your belongings. It felt like an attack on their culture and their homes, not a health measure.
So the locals in Cheung Chau felt like they were under siege from both the disease and the doctors.
Exactly. So the local community, specifically the Haifeng or Hulklo community, who were fishermen, took a different approach. They turned to spiritual defense.
This is where the festival comes in.
Yes. They believed the plague was caused by evil spirits or angry ghosts. Bleach and fire wouldn't fix that. You needed a god. They invited Taoist priests and carried the statue of Pak Tai, the northern emperor, through the streets to cleanse the island.
So the parade wasn't a party, it was an exorcism.
It was a desperate community health intervention. They were marching to drive out death. And the crazy thing is, the plague did eventually subside in Cheung Chau.
So in the minds of the locals, Pak Tai had won.
Precisely. The colonial doctors had burned houses and failed to stop the fear. Pak Tai had brought the community together and cleared the spirits. That is why the festival stuck. It wasn't just a fun weekend, it was a commemoration of survival.
It is interesting that you mentioned the Hulklo community. They were a minority group on the island, right?
Yes, and that is a key point. The Bun Festival started as a ritual for this specific dialect group. But because it worked and because it was so powerful, it was adopted by the whole island. It evolved from a minority clan ritual into Cheung Chau's defining identity, eventually becoming a national intangible cultural heritage.
It is amazing how a trauma response becomes a celebration over a century later. It's like if we turned a lockdown into a carnival.
That is a great way to put it. It is resilience turned into ritual.
Let's shift gears one more time. We have talked about survival against pirates, against landlords, and against the plague. But there is another kind of survival story on this island that is often overlooked. We are moving to the post-World War II era.
Right. The Cold War is simmering. China is going through massive upheaval, and Hong Kong becomes a city of refugees.
I think people forget that in the 1950s and 60s, a huge chunk of Hong Kong's population were refugees.
Absolutely. And in Cheung Chau, many of these refugees ended up living on the water. We aren't talking about nice houseboats. We're talking about squatter boats. Sampans crowded together in the typhoon shelter, no sanitation, precarious safety. It was a humanitarian crisis floating in the harbor.
Entered the Kadoorie family.
The Kadoorie Agricultural Aid Association, the KAAA. If you hike around the new territories, you see their legacy everywhere. Bridges, paths, farms. But their work on Cheung Chau was very specific.
They weren't just handing out cash, were they?
No, their philosophy was help people help themselves. The Kadoories believed that if you gave people the tools, they would rebuild their own lives. So they provided pigsties, livestock, cement, and interest-free loans.
Pigs and cement, the building blocks of civilization.
In that context, yes. The idea was to turn destitute refugees into self-sufficient farmers. And there is a specific spot on the island that captures this era beautifully, which I think is a real architectural anomaly for Hong Kong.
The Care Village.
Kon Lok San Suan. It was built in the 1960s, funded largely by donations from North America. If you hike up near the hilltop, you find this cluster of stone cottages. They don't look like traditional Chinese village houses, and they don't look like British colonial buildings.
They look almost suburban.
They have a very distinct, almost utopian cottage feel. It was a planned community for those boat squatters. It represented a move from surviving on the water to living on the land.
It is a bit of a climb to get there, isn't it?
It is, but for the listener who wants to see something real, it is completely worth it. It stands as a monument to that specific moment in history, the shift from traditional charity to modern developmental aid.
Speaking of that shift, you also flagged a really stark contrast between two buildings on the island in the sources. We mentioned the modern St. John Hospital earlier, but there's an older one.
The ruins of the Phong Bin Hospital. It was established way back in 1872.
Phong Bin means convenience in Cantonese, right? Like a convenience store.
In this context, it is a grim euphemism. It wasn't convenient for the patient. It was a hospice in the darkest sense of the word. It was a place for the destitute, the dying, and the abandoned to go so they wouldn't die on the streets.
Wow, so it was essentially a death house?
Yes. It was about managing death, not preserving life. So when you walk past the ruins of Phong Bin near the Pak Tai Temple, and then you hike up to the Care Village or look at St. John Hospital, you are seeing the physical evolution of welfare in Hong Kong.
From a place to die quietly to a place to get better and build a life.
Exactly. The island's architecture tells the story of how we treat the vulnerable.
It is incredible how much history is packed into this one dumbbell-shaped rock. We have covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
So let's try to pull this all together. We started with the mission to see the bones and skin of Cheung Chau. What does this all mean to you? What is the through line here?
I think Cheung Chau is a place of contradictions that somehow work. You have pirates who become police. You have a private clan acting as the government for 200 years. You have a festival that looks like a carnival but was born out of a deadly plague.
It is like the island is constantly reinventing itself but never throwing away the past.
Exactly. It is a living museum of survival strategies. The locals didn't just accept colonial rule or pirate rule. They negotiated with it. They found ways to live in between the lines. When the British drew a segregation line, the locals just kept growing around it. When the clan owned the land, people built houses anyway.
It is the state within a state concept again, whether it was the pirate state, the clan state, or the colonial state.
Precisely. And the people of Cheung Chau survived them all.
So next time you are on the ferry, heading over for a day trip, what should be on your mind?
Don't just look at the shops. Look for the cracks in the surface. Go find Boundary Stone 14 inside the hospital. Or climb the hill above the pirate cave and ignore the hole in the ground. Look at the water.
And ask yourself a question. Who actually owned this land? Was it the empire that drew the maps and passed the laws? Or was it the people, the pirates, the clans, the refugees who actually navigated the waters and worked the soil?
The map is not the territory.
It never is. That is a fantastic, provocative thought to leave you with. Next time you eat a mango mochi, remember that you are standing on pirate treasure, clan land, and a deep history of resilience. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.
See you next time.